I'm curious, are there any global recommendations for climbers that you have as far as strength movements to incorporate that maybe aren't obvious that people are missing?
So key things, I think, for all climbers are, one is working your upper traps. So your scapula works. So your muscles tend to work in force couples. So a movement around a joint, there'll be multiple muscles involved generally, and they need to work together to create a smooth movement or a powerful movement or a strong movement. And what I've started to notice with climbers climbing on steeper terrain more and more is they're neglecting the upper trap muscles. So they're the ones that are responsible for you standing up, shrugging your shoulders towards your ears, and up and backwards as well. And if any climber tends to start feeling like their neck is getting sore, or they're starting to have shoulder issues, it's not always the case, but I personally start using this exercise a lot, and I tend to get a lot of climbers doing it throughout the base phase as well, and then they drop it when we get more specific, and that is leaning shoulder shrugs. So you just lean to one side holding on to a fixed object, and you're doing that same shrugging motion, so shoulder really low down holding a dumbbell, then you're trying to reach your ear and then shove it back slightly just to get the full range, and then back down. And that, or sort of shoulder presses, is something I use a lot with athletes in a base phase. And if I see that they're particularly weak doing that motion, then I'll get them to use that quite a lot. And it just seems to help shoulder health a lot. And it also helps people feel stronger in their back muscles when they're climbing, because it's helping support this force couple and making sure that the whole back is being activated and not just part of the back. So that's one example. Another one, which I think slightly different again, is looking at dorsiflexion of the ankle. I think modern footwear and spending too much time in really tight boots and standing on small footholds means that our ankles are generally getting quite stiff. And dorsiflexion is effectively when you are lifting your toes towards your knees.
So this would be like
if you want,
pulling on a toe hook position.
Yeah, so that's the dorsiflexion position in terms of like the positioning of the foot, plantar flexions when you're pushing downwards. But I guess the strengthening that I would do, I'd increase the range of the dorsiflexion so that you can make sure that your heels can be dropped, which makes a massive difference on slopers, but also makes a huge difference on a lot of tensiony style climbs where you're having to push really hard into the hold. But then you can't let your heel rise too much because the foot skids up. So you increase the range of that dorsiflexion, but then by adding weight to calf raises and going through a full range of motion, so getting your toes on the edge of a step, like a normal step in your house, and doing one leg calf raises through a full range or adding weight to it, that creates a lot of strength and stability. Being able to push off that foot, also hold tension on slopey footholds. If you're interested in slab climbing, it's an absolute must.
Hey friends, I want to take a second to tell you about my new favorite climbing shoes. I fell in love with these this year. This is the Drone CS from Madrock. It's an amazing bouldering shoe, and I actually sent all of my hardest boulders in 2023 wearing the Drone CS. I also just got my first pair of the Drone 2.0. The Drone 2.0 is a huge improvement over the original, in my opinion. It has a lot of the same features as the Drone CS, which I love. It's just a little bit stiffer and more supportive, and you can really toe into small footholds and edge really well with this shoe. I really love both of these shoes, and I think they complement each other really well. If you want to check them out, head over to madrock.com and use code NUGGET at checkout to save 10% off your first order. That's madrock.com. Use code NUGGET to save 10% off your order. All right, enjoy the rest of the video.
The best climbers that I work with have a huge dorsiflexion ability in terms of the range of motion they can do and create tension in. If you want to see the king of that example is people like Charles Albert or Tomohiro Nagasaki. They're amazing. Like watch them standing in slopes on volumes and stuff, and their heels are so low. a good little test to see if you are good at that or bad at that is, and there's a bit of variant on this, but I'll just throw some I'll throw some numbers out there so people can try at home, is a knee to wall test. So you're pretty much standing near a wall, you move your foot slightly further away, pointing directly at the wall, toes towards the wall, and you've got to try and touch your knee against the wall. So you kind of like bend forward, one leg behind, touch your knee against the wall. And then you slide your foot slightly further back, so your toes are further away, and then you touch your knee against the wall. 15 centimeters and above is good. Anything less than that, or 10 to 15 centimeters, I'd be going, okay, this could be an attribute that would be useful to work on. And there'll be a lot of people that aren't good at that. Less than 10 centimeters, it'll be definitely something to work on. And don't get me wrong, I've seen very, very good climbers that can't do this. And so I think Dave McLeod is a good example of someone with really tight ankles, but he has broken both of them, so he's limited in that range. But it's an attribute that it keeps coming up more and more in the athletes that I've worked with that are really, really good. And I think it's something that most people don't tend to think about too much.
That's great. I'm just doing a conversion for our American listeners. So 15 centimeters is about 6 inches, just under 6 inches. 10 centimeters is just under 4 inches. So if the tip of your toe ends up more than 6 inches away from the wall and you can still touch your knee, that's great. And if you're closer to 4, definitely something to work on. I'm like doing it. I'm like standing at my bed. I use my bed as a standing desk for people listening, and I'm doing it right now against my cabinet. And I think I need to work on it. It's not awful, but I'm like, yeah, that's probably 5 inches or less. Just looking down, but I'll measure it later. That's interesting. Do you, it's also what you're talking about is really helpful for knee bar strength too. And just like having a wider range of knee bars that you can use if you have more dorsiflexion. Something I've thought about though is if you open up the range of your ankle, do you lose any strength when it comes to just like standing on small footholds for a really long time? I think I almost like rely on that tightness, which probably isn't great, but any thoughts on that?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, so one, you can definitely build up strength in the full range. If you've seen martial artists being able to hold themselves up with both feet on chairs and in box splits, you can build the maximum strength in there. But I do get that you get free strength through tension, and you get free strength endurance through tension. I had a really funny example of this. I've just done a sports massage course recently, and I had my forearms pummeled for a couple of days on this course, and then I went and climbed on the board, did a thorough warm-up, and I felt like floppy jelly because all the residual tension that I built up in these big training days are gone. But the one thing I would say is on like long style climbs with smaller edges, you actually learn to use your feet slightly differently. And a lot of the climbers that I found that I've climbed with who are really, really good on slabs and really techy terrain have amazing dorsiflexion. And I'm talking like slate climbing in North Wales, or like crack climbing, or really technical traditional climbing where you're on your feet for 40, 50 minutes or plus. I mean that's quite a short time really for trad. But they tend to have really, really good dorsiflexion, and it's kind of crazy that they can still hold the tension there, but actually when you watch them do it, they're just in a slightly different range, and they're probably finding it easier to keep their heels lower, which actually weights the foothold slightly differently, rather than, I don't know if you've had it where you're on a route and you're starting to get tired and you're standing on a small edge, and rather than keeping your heel low because it's comfortable to do that, all your muscles are doing this multiple contraction, which is normal when you're trying really hard, and you start finding yourself drifting higher and higher up on your tiptoe, and you're starting to get tense rather than just staying low. So that residual tension actually can